There's literally one way that you get to retire. That's it. There's one. You either save enough and invest enough, or you don't. If you don't save enough and invest enough, you cannot borrow your way to retirement. We have Social Security and it doesn't work. There's a sense of personal responsibility that has to be taken. As a financial planner, I'm not putting it on the government.
I want you to help me plan for my retirement. I know about 401k, but is that enough for me?
The maximum that you're able to put in is in the neighborhood of $20,000 a year. But that $20,000 is fixed. A lot of people buy too much house.
We don't talk about that because people think bigger is better.
Do you need a house if you don't want kids? What are your needs? As we live longer and technology continues to advance, we're going to run into this problem. What happens in the next 10 years when all fast food chains are fully automated? All of those jobs aren't around.
ChatGPT, that new thing that's coming out.
Our work-life balance is not at par with living a healthy life long term. We are working for the dollar just for the dollar's sake. That's leaving us with a ton of health issues going forward.
Thank you everybody for tuning in. I am excited for another episode with you. I have a wealth manager who's a longtime friend of mine. We went to college together. It feels like it's been forever, but like me, we're both getting the gray hairs. So we are excited to catch up. And especially when we get into how his life is going now, I think it's a trend that a lot of people are going to find exciting for California. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce John Lane, who is a wealth manager in a company based in the Bay Area. And he's had a long breadth of experience with finances. And you can tell by the way he's dressed, if you're watching it on YouTube, that the guy is very sharp. And he's always been that way. Always somebody that I admired for that. And he's got an incredible wealth of knowledge that I want to bring to you guys involving finances, which is one aspect in the show that we don't talk about much, but it's important for us to get it out there. So John, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you coming out from the state of Idaho to come out here and talk to me. That is awesome, man.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Mike. It's been a very long time since we've had some conversations, but it definitely pleasure being here. Definitely appreciate it. As you had mentioned, I'm a wealth advisor and have been for 12 or 13 years now for a couple different firms. I specialize in working with high net worth individuals on their finances, not because I don't want to help everybody, but because there's some tax implications that really benefit high net worth individuals that I have grown to specialize in over the years. But apart from that, I'm also an author and an aspiring author as well. I'm in the process of writing a new book, more geared toward children and finance. So a children's book on finance. So I'm interested in how that goal transpires over the next year or so. But I love finance. I love talking finance. There's, I think, a lot to uncover in the interview, and I appreciate you inviting me on.
Well, thank you, John. And an author. See, that's one thing that we haven't caught up, and I didn't even know you were writing books now. That is awesome, man. So for the audience out here, and even for myself, can you explain what a wealth manager actually does? Because the implication might be that's something that's only for the rich people, but you actually work with a lot of people.
Yeah. So I guess over the course of my career, I've definitely worked with quite a few people. A wealth manager helps you manage your wealth, manage your income. Some specialize in budgeting, tax implications, especially in California. It's not hard to see that on a federal level, you're going to be paying a lot of taxes, right? On federal level and California taxes, they're pretty high. They're, one or two in the nation, depending on what metric you want to use. For that impacts a lot of Californians, even so that if I go to the Midwest and I talk to somebody and they're making, $75,000 to $100,000 a year, and I tell them I'm working with clients in the Bay that are living paycheck to paycheck and they're making $250,000 a year, those people in the Midwest look at me cockeyed and they're like, what is going on with you people in California? It's like, well, the cost of living is higher, the taxes are higher, literally everything that we buy is higher, which means that the income goes less. So that's where you would hire a financial planner or wealth advisor to help you with managing some of those expectations, because it's about how do we, and I'll steal from one of our fraternity brothers actually, how do we pay our future selves first? And that's an important piece of financial planning that often gets lost in the day-to-day. We go to work, we come home, play with the kids, and we don't think about the future. enough.
Where did that come from, do you think? Because there's always this idea, and I haven't been to Europe yet. I want to go, but the idea is over there is you work to live, and over here we have this mentality of we live to work, and it's the American dream or whatever it is, and we get so caught up in maybe trying to buy the nicer things, but then when it comes to planning whatever, do you really find that maybe we just manage things differently here, that it's kind of hurting the way that we live?
I absolutely believe that. So I would say over the last few years, it's become more of a realization for myself personally on a personal level, in that our work-life balance is not at par with living a healthy life long term. What I mean by that is we are working for the dollar just for the dollar's sake. And that's leaving us with a ton of health issues going forward. But the answer to that is not necessarily government involvement, right? We have Social Security and Medi-Cal and Medicare and all of that stuff, and it doesn't work because there's a sense of personal responsibility that has to be taken, which is where, as a financial planner, I'm not putting it on the government to get me to retirement age. In fact, Social Security was not created for retirement purposes. That's what we've now come to know it as, and it will cover a portion of your retirement income. But it was supposed to be for the small portion of the population that lived a long time after the normal age of retirement. I forget the exact numbers, but basically, when it was enacted by FDR in the New Deal, that Social Security would cover roughly 2 to 3 years of somebody's life, from, call it roughly age 65 to 67. It was never indexed for age. So now that we're living closer to 80 on average, right? A married couple on average will live to age 85, at least one of them. We haven't indexed Social Security for that period of time. We still have it at 67. It's come up a little bit, but not enough. In all reality, it should be 75. That's when Social Security should start. No one wants to hear that because it's a pretty big tax that's out there, a tax on your income that's out there. But it's what it does is it detracts us from saving for our own sake, like a 401k plan would do. And that's where, again, having a financial advisor tell you that early on in your career and helping you plan accordingly, you can retire, I think, early. And I think that is a good goal that a lot of Californians do have. And they put in a lot of work in order to amass a certain dollar amount that they then can retire and live off of a modest income. Probably not in the state of California, but I think you bring up a really good point.
So when you talk about helping people plan for their future, what are some of the bigger challenges that you've seen from it? Is it the fact that people don't make enough money? Is it the fact that maybe they're not managing it correctly, and so they may not realize that, hey, this money that I'm getting on my paycheck, a percentage should go over here? What has been some of your bigger challenges that maybe a lot of people probably fall in the category of when it comes to planning?
Consumerism, probably number one. Taxation is another big issue, and consumerism ties into sort of cost of living, and debt management are really the three big components of the reason that people cannot save or invest at an earlier age. And the fact that there's no financial literacy taught at any level of education, from elementary school on up through college, which is frightening because, again, we see this a lot with athletes and entertainers, but it's true of police officers and lawyers, doctors. It's true across the board. This sudden wealth, it's not sudden, right? To be a doctor, it takes
a lot of years of training,
decade of schooling. But once that decade of schooling is gone, and they go from making $75,000 a year as a resident to $400,000 a year, they go, I made it. And then they look at their balance sheet, and their balance sheet is saying, well, you have 6 figures in debt already, not with a house, and you got to start paying that off. Well, that's $400,000 doesn't feel that same way, especially when it's taxed at almost 40% federally in whatever state that you're in.
Right. Yep.
On top of it. So taxes, consumerism, because the doctor can't just go, I'm going to live frugally for the next 5 years after they live frugally for 10, making 400. They're going to go buy the place in Ruby Hill. Yeah. Right. So that's a big mortgage on top of it.
Buy the M3.
Yeah. They got to have the right car. That has an impact, unfortunately, on their ability to save long term.
Look at that.
Okay.
Here's one thing that I've always had a challenge with, because it's almost like what's the other side of the coin? One of the big things that I've seen is, I mean, I think it's pretty much standard, or we'll agree with it on the show at least, that America is the greatest country in the world. We have our problems like anybody else, but we are the greatest country in the world. And, you know, there's an argument that China is coming up upon us in terms of taking over the world economy. That's a whole separate conversation. But one of the things that makes the American economy go is that it's sort of predicated on us spending money. I mean, and when, what was it? I think Nixon that got rid of the gold standard and said, we're done with this, and now we're going to go to a different model. It just sort of opened up Pandora's box. So it's almost like in order for us to keep the country going, it's predicated on us spending money. Banks, credit card companies, it's all based upon, if Americans don't spend money, then we don't make money. GDP goes down, the cogs start stopping. And do we end up making things worse? What's your opinion on that in terms of maybe we have to keep this consumerism up just to keep the country going?
It's a great point, and it's a contentious one at that. Unfortunately, we do have to spend on it. So when I'm talking as a wealth advisor, it's more on an individual level. Globally, or at least in the U.S. or countries around the world, they're held to a different standard on that spending through to generate that economic growth, which is unfortunate because, again, you can't save or invest for the future by spending today. You have to sacrifice. You just do. My wife and I, we sacrificed by living in a 950 square foot apartment for almost 10 years, or maybe a little over 10 years before we bought our place in Idaho. Which was another sacrifice, moving out of state, away from family and friends that we had developed over the last 20 plus years or longer. I had never lived outside of the Bay Area myself. So leaving all of that behind was a sacrifice, but only through that sacrifice can we get the things that we want in order to have that work-life balance. But that's on an individual level. So on a national level, it pains me to say, but yeah, we're between a rock and a hard place because we have to spend, which is what we saw in the pandemic when they were cutting those checks, saying that, here's $1,000 or $1,500, go spend, go out in the community and spend. And that's what people did.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a story about a coworker of mine that went to Vegas, and then literally, no joke, she said there was somebody running through the casino saying, I got my stimulus check. And it's a microcosm of how some people took it. You get free money from the government. I'm going to go buy, that, cell phone or that computer or whatever it is. And then other people who were eligible for it said, I'm going to take that and put that in my 457B, or I'm going to take that, I'm going to put it in my whatever, because I don't need the money per se, but they're giving it to me, so I might as well make it work for me. And it became a big narrative during the pandemic that, almost like the rich got richer, or maybe the smarter got, however you want to put that. And then the people who weren't maybe as literate as they want to be on how to spend the money, it just, that money that they spend end up going back to the people at the top in one way or another. And it's, you're right, because we don't teach people in college, even high school, college, whatever. Here's a class on how you're going to have to manage your money. Here's an idea of how much debt you can get into early on. Here's the hole you could dig yourself into that might take you 10, 15 years to get out of.
Yep.
And it's you're right. It's a big challenge here. And then going back to the point that we talked about earlier, it's almost like if you're at a point where you're able to invest your money smartly, plan for retirement, it's almost like in order for you to do that, somebody else has to make the mistake, if you will, of they have to spend the money. Because if you have a small business and you're predicated on people spending, you're like, I have to save money because I'm planning, but my business is predicated upon them spending so I can employ my people and whatnot. And you're right, from a national level, it's like, how do you really
I don't know how
that?
you balance that. I'm not a politician. So.
Well, you definitely have to look, man. I'll tell you right now. Somebody came in with the three-piece suit. I'm like, this is the guy I want to have running the country. This is the guy I want to have representing my district. But going back to specifically wealth management. So When somebody reaches out to a wealth manager, what are the typical questions that they have at first? Is it usually over their head, like I have no clue what I'm doing with this?
No, I would say finances are actually pretty simple and self-explanatory, which is, again, if it's so simple, why isn't it taught? But it's pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory as far as a conversation that we have. But the clients that I now, I guess, serve are what would be considered as high net worth individuals, and they have some semblance already of what I do or my profession. They're an expert in what they do, and they're saying, even though I can learn this activity, I'm going to hire somebody else to do it. Whether that be a doctor or a dentist or a business owner, a tattoo artist that owns a few shops, a barber, or a saloonist that owns a couple of saloons or salons, around the country or what have you, or a real estate developer. They're an expert in what they do. They don't want to spend the time to learn about, what programs they can to help them save money on taxes or invest into their future or their kids' future, and to protect that. They want to hire the accountant. They want to hire the financial planner. They'll hire the attorney, and they'll pay a pretty penny for that. But they recognize that's a service that they can do themselves, but they'd rather hire that out.
That makes sense. So how does your profession differ from, let's say, a bookkeeper or an accountant or an investor who takes your money and says, I'm going to put it in this stock or whatnot?
So we're looking at it more from a holistic view, or I'm looking at it more from a holistic view. And how do we fit together the different puzzle pieces to maximize or optimize their wealth over time? An accountant or bookkeeper is incredibly important. They're the ones that cross the T's and dot the I's as it pertains to the actual tax advice that's given. But they're looking more or less backward, if we think about it, right? You earn the money, you look backward and say, okay, now what do I have to pay on that? That's not necessarily true on W-2 for W-2 employees, but it is true for business owners and call it C-level executives.
Gotcha.
And how they structure their bonuses. So accountants and bookkeepers more or less are looking present and backward. Financial planners are looking forward and present. Attorneys come in and protect everybody. So and then you have your stockbrokers. So your stockbrokers are the ones really doing the trading day in, day out. That's not what I do. I'm not looking at everybody's portfolio on a day-to-day basis. Again, it's more from a holistic view is how do we create that wealth and keep that wealth for generations to come.
Okay, gotcha. So if you have, let's say, a doctor, let's say he's making $300,000 a year, and he's like, John, I want you to help me plan for my retirement. I know about 401k. I put as much as I can in there, but is that enough for me? Can you help me figure out either how much I should save for whatever? How deep do you normally get? Do you pretty much say, okay, you make $10,000 a month, let's say pre-taxes. Here's how we can manage it. So this is your tax structure. Here's how much you can spend it. Do you go that deep?
We go that deep with many of our clients. And again, there's elements of juggling, call it their budget, their profession, how long they plan on working, their family size, their history, any inheritance that they're going to get. There's a lot of different factors that go into building out a financial plan, and we go in depth with all of our clients with respect to that. Now, for people making six figures and up, there's oftentimes that cream, and the mentality is, and you brought it up with the 401k and 457. People think that that's enough. But then we do the calculations for them. With a 401k plan, without it being a plan that we would necessarily put together per se, the maximum that you're able to put in is somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 a year. That would be great if somebody making $100,000 a year would be able to do that. That would be 20% of their income going into that. And over time, they would then be able to create a bucket of money that they could then live off of going forward. But that $20,000 is fixed. So if you're making $400,000 a year, it's still $20,000 that you're able to put into that plan.
Right. Yeah.
So the problem is, again, in the consumer-based world, the doctor, business owner, whatever, used to making $400,000 a year, that doesn't go away when you retire.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You start to learn to spend that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now you may not have a mortgage or stuff like that as you get into your 60s and 70s, but you're also not working. And what people forget about the whole retirement thing is when you're in those positions and you're working 40 to 60 hours a week, well, when you're working, you're typically not spending money. Mm-hmm. So when you're retired, now you're not working. So what are you going to do with those extra 40 to 60 hours a week? Are you going to sit at home and just watch Netflix? If so, then maybe you could retire. But oftentimes people want to travel, pick up an occupation, or not an occupation, but they'll pick up golf, right?
That's pretty penny to, yeah.
Golf is not a cheap sport by any stretch. They'll join a country club or tennis club or bowling. Doesn't really matter. All of these things cost money. And you're going to be doing them more often, and it's going to cost more money. But you're retired. You're not working. So that's a balancing act that we have to have as we're creating this roadmap for somebody that wants to retire. So that's where they'd hire me, and we'd go through a plan with them. And there's different tax strategies like defined benefit plans, profit sharing plans that we can layer on top of a 401k plan to allow them to then say contribute $60,000 a year or $300,000 a year into a tax advantaged plan. But it's for the purpose of how do we build enough wealth that they can retire comfortably in the lifestyle that they've built for themselves. They don't necessarily have to step down or step up. It's their lifestyle that they built over 30 plus years.
Gotcha. So to sum it up, basically, if I'm making $100,000 a year and I say, hey, John, help me plan out my financial future, you'll look at how much money I'm bringing in and say, okay, here's how much you're putting into your 401k, whatever. You have a car. Here's your car payment. You're going to spend this much in groceries. So you pretty much make it easier for people to say, okay, I have $500 a month that I can spend on clothes, or I have $1,000 a month that I could spend on groceries and going out. Okay, if I stick to that and I invest where my financial planner advises me or wealth manager advises me to, then by the time I hit age 50 or 60 or whatever the number is, then I should have about X amount of money. Obviously, there's always fluctuations in the market. You can't predict that. But generally, I should have about that much money, and I can retire at 50, fill in the blank, and then sort of live the life that I want to live. That's pretty much.
Ideally speaking, that would be exactly how it would play out.
Right.
And then we, factor in for variables that come along.
Gotcha.
Like children and.
That's a whole. Definitely. You're right. You ask people, hey, do you have children right now? No. Do you want children? We want to have 2 children. Okay. Are you where schools cost this much? You where clothes cost? Here's the average for food that it's going to cost you. If you need nannies, this is going to cost you this much.
That all goes into the plan. We can put those numbers into a software program and it'll spit out some data. But that's stuff that would have to be updated over time.
Gotcha.
As people's lives change, so does their financial future. And we need to account for that. And that's where a wealth planner or a financial planner could come in. Now, as far as the budgeting there, that's not something that I personally do.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of, you'll hear me talk about personal responsibility quite a bit. But there are financial planners that will create a budget for their clients.
Okay. And then generally speaking, how often do you check in with the client? Do they call you up and say, hey, I want a 6-month check-in? Or do you proactively, hey, every month, Bob, how are you doing? Is everything going good? Do you have any questions, kind of a thing?
Usually quarterly to semi-annual. Again, in the beginning, it's a little bit more high touch. But after the plan is sort of set, they've got their investments going, it becomes more or less on autopilot unless big changes happen. They sell a business, they sell a piece of real estate, they have kids, they get divorced, they buy a home. All of these things can impact it, and we'll update from there.
Gotcha. So I think I asked this already, but if you were to sum up maybe like the one big pushback that you get, what is it usually about? Is it usually, John, I'm making this much money. I kind of want to buy that house in this neighborhood, but you're kind of telling me that if I want to retire, I can't?
Yeah. It's about making choices.
Gotcha.
So, and that's a pushback. The other pushback is at least in respect to my, profession, is not understanding, and that's our fault for not clarifying that. But the difference between a stockbroker and a wealth advisor. Oftentimes people are chasing returns. There's always somebody out there that can, promise or maybe even deliver a higher return. But in the investment services world, nothing is guaranteed. So, from that perspective, I'm not asking you or anyone else to hire me based off of performance on investments. It's performance on advice. Am I giving you the right advice for the time of life that you're in? And how do we grow together from there?
Yeah, you're playing the long game. You're like, hey, with you work with somebody like me, here's the long-term plan we're going to do for you. You're not going to see the results tomorrow or 5 years from now, but 20 years from now, this is where we're projecting. And you're right. It's so hard for us to want to see it that way. Like, remember when you were 21 years old or whatever, and you started your 401k?
Yeah.
And it was like the slow line. You're like, this isn't going anywhere. Why are they telling me that when I retire, I'm going to have this much? Because it's not going anywhere. And then you just stick with it. And next thing you know, compound interest kicks in. 10 years later, it's like this, and then it just shoots up. But you don't see that when you're 20. And sometimes it's so hard for people to realize, I have to put money away now. I know it's not going to look like a lot, but if I stick to it, I can be in a much better position. Do you get a lot of people interested in this endeavor who are in their early 20s? Maybe like, especially around here, tech money, new money. We're like, oh my God, I got 6 figures. What do I do with it?
No.
Good answer.
So there are a few in their 20s or early 30s that definitely pick up on the need for a wealth planner. But to be honest, no, because that money comes in an environment like we're in the Bay Area. It can be gone almost instantly. And that's not necessarily even including the fringe benefits, the buying the BMWs or Audis or, Ray-Bans or what have you. It just costs so much to live here that, truly speaking, $200,000 a year for somebody that's in their 20s that has amassed $50,000 in student loan debt, another $15,000, $20,000 in credit card debt. Even though they're making that amount of money, the rent, the cost of living can eat away at that $200,000 in a heartbeat.
Yeah, you have no idea. I mean, I see it so often here at Google, and now we have right now as we're taping this, there's a lot of layoffs going on in the tech sector.
Yep.
And it starts to hit them a little bit. It's like, people who were used to making these exorbitant amounts of money, and it was on a wave during the pandemic when all those tech companies just start overhiring and everything. This is the way it is now.
Yep.
Now it's come back down to reality where maybe we don't need as many people doing the software engineer job or the sales team at Google or whatnot. They're like, well, we actually don't need you guys now. And it's a reality check to say, all right, well, if that job isn't there for me anymore, the money's not flowing in. How do I survive in an environment where the housing market always takes a second to readjust to it? So for right now, you're still paying the money that maybe you paid in 2021 or whatever it is. It's not going to correct itself for a while overnight. Yeah. And how do you deal with it? What has been like the big, if you can kind of put your finger on it, a big inflection point that people hit where they say, okay, now I got to get serious about how long-term planning. Do you think it's the kids that come into play and it hits them? Do you think it's maybe they realize, oh, this money I'm spending on this BMW is $800 a month? Hold on a second now.
I would say that come the late 30s and early 40s, if I were to put an age on it, is when most or a lot of people start to realize, hey, I'm getting close to that age that people said, I should be retired, and I've got virtually nothing in my saving or investing accounts. I need to do something about it. And that's when they sort of have that epiphany. Unfortunately, the longer that we wait, because of compound interest, it's just math. Yeah. So again, when I say, financial literacy is easy, it's because it's just derived off of math. So if they wait till age 40, but they started working at 20 or 22, that's 18 years of compound interest and habit forming activities of saving that they didn't do.
Yeah.
So now they got to start at 40 for the next 20 years, right, to get to 60, to make up for that. And it's that make up for that really hurts, because we're not talking about saving 15 to 20% of your income to make up that difference. We're talking about saving 30 to 40% of our income to do that. And that's just not possible in California when you're at, you're at 30+% tax rate. So you're talking 30% is going to go to the government or more.
Yes.
And you got your house, you got usually kids at that point in time. It's hard to do. Say, not only are we going to take that $300,000 that you and your wife or your spouse are making, but you got to save 100,000 of it.
Yeah.
So now you're at 200,000. It just doesn't work.
Start getting some wacky numbers right there.
It gets wonky, and that's where it becomes a hard part of the job.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, unfortunately, they'll see those numbers in their late 30s and 40s, and they may not act on it immediately, and then they get to the 50s. And I've seen a ton of 50-year-olds with $250,000 in their 401k plan. Don't get me wrong. $250,000 is a lot of money, but you're not retiring off of $250,000. And $250,000 at age 55 may double between 55 and 65. You're not retiring off of $500,000. It's just not going to happen.
You know, one thing we sort of gloss over this in general in society, but we never really talk about what is retirement. And kind of where did that idea come up? I mean, are you well traveled? Been to Europe?
I'm I would say I'm well traveled. I haven't been to Europe other than Frankfurt Airport for whatever that was, 3 hours on my way to Africa.
Layovers don't count.
Layovers don't count. So I've been to Africa, Central America, India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and then all over the United States and Canada and Mexico. So I am what I would consider well-traveled.
More than me, I'll tell you right now.
The retirement conversation, I'm not entirely sure where it comes from.
I guess the idea is we think of it as this number. Let's say it's 50. I want to retire at 50. And then retirement, when you ask people, usually thinks, I'll be sitting on a beach drinking margaritas in my backyard. And then that's life. That's the life I'm going to live. And maybe there was a time in our life where that was more practical when we lived, maybe to 65, and everything was broken in you. You're like, well, my twilight years, I'm going to enjoy it. And now people are living longer. So I'm starting to see a lot of people in their 60s and 70s who, if you look at them, you might think they're like 55 or so, because they keep themselves so much in shape, and they want to continue working whatever career that they actually do. And to them, retirement in their mind might be, well, I don't want to sit on the beach lazy. I don't want to just play golf. I want to still go out and do whatever the thing that I want to do is. And so when we talk about retirement for people, it's not necessarily you can hang up your cleats, if you will, whatever job you do, and then don't do anything. But whatever you transition into, at least you're not under the pressure of having to, make X amount of money, because you've saved a good portion. That whatever you want to do, maybe you want to work at Trader Joe's as a bagger because you love customer service. You don't make a lot of money there, but when you factor in the benefits you might get and then the money you saved up already, that you can still live a great life that way. What's your, do you ever have those type of conversations with your clients as they plan for that?
Yeah, it's retiring from their profession as they've done it for 20 or 30 years and moving on to the next stage of life. Retirement may look more like financial independence, but as we live longer and technology continues to advance, we're going to run into this problem as a society more and more, which we see at a younger and younger age, right? We mentioned, through every downturn in the economy, things are still moving and working. And as a result of that, we're seeing McDonald's, a couple weeks ago, have a few franchises that have 0 employees.
Oh yeah, I think that one in Texas is fully automated or something.
Fully automated.
Crazy.
What happens in the next 10 years when all fast food chains are fully automated? And now all of those jobs aren't around. In the tech space, you have
ChatGPT, that new thing that's coming out. Yeah, that's
right. That's just one example, but they passed the bar, the medical exam. They probably passed all the security stuff that I've done.
That's nuts.
Right. So what happens when there's a few thousand of those machines that are taking over attorneys' jobs, right? Doing trust work, or, not necessarily the comprehensive thinking aspect of being an attorney, but the day-to-day operations. What happens when the law firms down the street don't have to hire 100 post-grads from Hastings, right? What happens to those jobs and those people
Dude, yeah, this is when you really think about the future and how technology has just shot up in the last 20. I mean, when we were in college, it's like I think I still had a flip phone or maybe one of those, what do you call those Nokia ones?
Yeah, the Nokia with the worm.
The green, yeah, exactly. Like that was, our technology then, and we were totally fine with it. Texting was like a cumbersome thing. Like this text doesn't make any sense. Now everything is so easy with a smartphone. I mean, I guess you could say we were lucky that we got past the iPhone. We were already graduated college before the iPhone came out. That's how old we are, people. And we were totally okay with it. And now we have young kids who they grow up with iPads and iPhones and the apps, and they can do so many things that we couldn't do when we were in college. And yeah, how do we adjust to it so fast? Because it's just,
I don't know. Again, the human population is in for some answers over the next couple decades as we answer those questions, because the work that we know is changing. The world that we live in is changing. I mean, with the advent of crypto over the last 13 years, that has a direct correlation to banking and finance.
oh yeah.
So what happens when there's no banks? That means all the bank tellers and managers all the way up are without a job. That's hundreds of thousands of people. UPS, I think yesterday, announced, I think it was UPS, they have now 20 airlines or 20 planes that are fully automated. That means no pilot.
That's crazy.
What happens if all the aircraft carriers are now operated by AI and there's no pilots? Those are all professions that employ hundreds of thousands of people around the world. We as a society have to figure out something else for all of us to do, myself included. And that's where that financial independence can play a role on an individual level. Again, I can't answer this stuff on a global level, but on an individual level, if we recognize that that's going to be a problem in the future, how do we set up our own family for that? And that takes sacrifice and investing and saving and growing those assets over time so that we can afford to have sort of that lifestyle that I foresee in the future, which is more of a less work in the traditional sense, and more of finding other things to do.
I mean, you touched on so many things there that I wanted to get into. One thing that I wanted to ask you in part of that conversation is, what did you learn, or what do you think the industry learned from what happened with FTX and that whole thing there about, well, this wasn't regulated, we all knew it, and this thing happened?
Fraud is fraud. So, FTX, I don't see it as a crypto collapse by any stretch. It's fraud. It's no different than Bernie Madoff. It's a central actor that did bad things. They commingled funds across they stole money, and then they donated to people in power to keep them in power for a long period of time. Unfortunately for the founder of FTX, he's now in the crosshairs of that United States regulatory body, and rightfully so, because again, he committed fraud. It's a bad actor, but that has nothing to do with crypto, because Bernie Madoff also committed fraud, and crypto wasn't even around back then.
Yeah.
He just stole people's money, and he also did some similar things as far as his interactions with the SEC and other government bodies to keep that fraud going for a long period of time, which is unfortunate for the individual investors and businesses and hedge funds or pensions that were tied into that.
Yeah.
But that's where I guess where I would put FTX.
So because they weren't regulated and the industry is not regulated as a whole, and this thing just put the spotlight that, hey, if this is going to be a thing, we have to regulate it. On paper, it definitely sounds good. Like, we need the regulation. Otherwise, there's no insurances in case you screw up, unlike like there is with major banks. But then the argument is, well, if you regulate it, now the whole basis of why crypto even exists, sort of, because I guess it was created to say we don't want the government to tell us what to spend it in. And then, but if you do that, I just think we're at a stage in human evolution where we haven't, humans are going to do what they're going to do. You give somebody that much power and that much oversight over all those finances. It's almost like, it is like, you're almost asking for it to happen with no regulation. It's like, let the guy, give him all the money and close your eyes, hope he does what you want him to do with it. But like, do you think the regulation is going to, if it ever comes to it, is going to is going to hurt crypto, or it's actually going to be like, this is the future that everybody's going to do eventually?
So I personally believe crypto is the future of finance in the world. I think that the Bitcoin maximalist or the premise that Bitcoin or crypto was founded on is altruistic at best. I think that you're absolutely right. There's no way that you're going to circumvent the entrenched banking relationships around the world. They've been around for the better part of 600 years. If you're going back to the Rothschilds and some of the other larger families that run the world, the Soros of the world, and so forth, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, all of these families go back a long time. You're not going to circumvent them with Bitcoin. You're just not. And on the Bitcoin front, we don't know who created it. It could have been J.P. Morgan that created it. So as a test.
Not the guy. What's his name? What's the guy's name? Shigeru something or whatever they say his name was that no one knows, no one even met.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably not him. It's probably an entity or group of people that created it. But it's because for good reasons, both good and bad, that we can get into. I love crypto.
I can tell you do. Yes.
I will put a little bit of a caveat in there. As a financial planner or wealth manager, crypto is something that in my industry I don't talk with my individual clients about because it's an unregulated industry. But personally, I've done a lot of research on it, and I have formed my own opinions for myself. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that crypto is our future because it deals with basic numbers and accounting in a way that we've been looking to do for centuries, right? With the abacus and mm-hmm. moving money around on a ledger, right? Distributed ledger technology. That's what crypto is. Mm. It's a ledger that's immutable. It's there for all to see. It's a checks and balances on finance. That is a very good thing for finance.
One of the big challenges that I've seen, and we saw this in the pandemic when the federal government was just printing money. Okay, we need to dump more money in there because people are losing their jobs in the pandemic, whatever it is. And when they were asked about Bitcoin, and what I learned is there's only so much Bitcoin out there. Like they can't either make any more or they can't what they call mine it, which I don't fully understand. And then they get into the environmental side. If you mine it, it causes all these other effects. But to me, it's like, well, if they can easily print money, why can't you print more Bitcoin? I don't fully get that concept that there's only so much, and once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, so there's an argument against that too. Or there's Bitcoin has 21 million coins available. That's derived from a mining process that utilizes energy over a period of time, and I think it's something like 200 or 300 years before all 21 million hits the market, if you will. However, as we see in today's environment, there's 22,000 cryptocurrencies around. I don't believe that all 22,000 are going to make it through the regulatory hurdles that are, being set in place by the United States government and the governments around the world. This is not just a United States issue. But I do believe that there are going to be a handful of what they call layer one protocols that will rule this growing industry. No different than the internet in the 90s and into the 2000s, right? So I personally believe that Bitcoin was the beta test, much like, was it Napster that was on the streaming music?
Before Pandora
and Spotify and iTunes, right? We don't know Napster anymore, right? You ask a 12-year-old kid, what's Napster? And they're going like, I don't know what Napster is.
Remember MySpace?
I do, yes. It's all about evolution, right? So that evolution is going to happen in crypto, but it's going to happen with regulation. The same regulation that happened in the internet space. And we saw that with you remember the .com bust?
Yep.
So the .com bust was there was pets.com and a bunch of other ads that, would pop up in the Super Bowl, not dissimilar to the FTX in the last Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So you have this growing new industry that needs regulation and will have it. And as a result, we are going to have a new monetary system for the world for good reasons. You brought up earlier that Nixon brought us off the gold standard. Mm-hmm. He actually finished it. FDR started it in the 40s. He lowered it from 1-to-1 to 1 and some fraction to gold. And then Nixon pulled us fully off the gold standard. So now we have a fiat currency that we can just print into oblivion.
I learned something new today about that. FDR started. Didn't know that.
Yep. So with a fiat currency, the US dollar, we can print it into oblivion. And that's how most of the countries around the world also treat their own currencies. So there is no commodity backing a currency. That's the only way that a currency will survive long term, is to have it backed by something, a physical hard asset. Mm-hmm. For the longest time, that was gold or silver. But if you look back through history, it's been seashells or exotic woods, whatever the case may be, but a commodity. We're now seeing that transpire with the BRICS nations, which is part of the reason why we're fighting this war from Russia to Ukraine, is centered around the United States dollar as the world reserve currency and the influence that has. Mm-hmm. So now we're seeing, I think it's Brazil, Russia, South Africa, China, India. I think those are the main BRICS nations. Basically come together and say, you know what, we're tired of the U.S. being the world reserve currency. Look, they've got a fiat currency that they just print into oblivion, and that hurts them and us through inflation, and that creates its own problems for the economy. We need a system that's backed off of commodities. So now you're hearing, again, the rhetoric go, we need to bring gold, silver, or maybe oil as a commodity into some sort of pooled resource to create a new world reserve currency. That creates friction. That world reserve currency, being the dollar, has been fantastic for us as a nation. Mm-hmm. We're the bank of the world, essentially. Everything transacts on the US dollar. Our lifestyle as Americans will greatly deteriorate if that world reserve currency goes by the wayside, which is where crypto comes in my opinion.
Okay.
Crypto is a way that you can immediately look at a ledger and have a checks and balances on money, where it gets spent, where it transacts and flows through. And you can back it to commodities if you want, but it's all digital. We all walk around with our phones and we pay on our phones. Yep. We, for all intents and purposes, already have digital money. This just takes it to one step further. And it's all about control on both sides. So crypto is here to stay. I don't know which protocols or layers or companies are going to be behind the ones that will stay. I have my opinions on that, but it's here. It is the next internet, if you will. It's the internet of value.
Well, that's the thing. Like we talked about the gold standard. I mean, if you limit the currency to a commodity and there's only so much of that commodity around, then do you stunt growth? And then, okay, well, that's it. That's all the gold that we found on this planet. So that's all the money we have. Spend it wisely. And then what does that do for... And then you get into a whole bunch of other social issues, which means that there's no more money flowing, then companies don't form. Quality of life can go down, per se, and then that opens up a whole other can of worms. Yep. And is that just sort of the gamble that we said, well, we're going to have to play that game then for the benefit of... We won World War II, if you want to call it that, depending on how you want to interpret that we can decide, okay, our dollar is going to be the standard for the world, so our country can thrive. And if you want to play the game with us, then you can also be a very valuable asset in the world. And if you don't, then we have the authority to do what we want, because our currency is the reason why other countries they live good lives. And so people want to continue living good lives. Yeah. And it's like, what do you do? What do you choose?
I don't know what to choose. So it's again, there's some big decisions that we have to make as a nation, as a world, as it pertains to all of what we're talking about.
Well, you brought up the whole population thing. What are your thoughts on that in terms of future with it? I have, my own thoughts on it, because I'm still trying to figure out what that actually means. You can make an argument that in 1918, the world had approximately 2 billion people, and we've been around for around 300,000 years. It took us that long to get to 2 billion. And in 100 years, we've now shot up to 8 billion.
Yeah, 4x.
Exactly, in 100 years, which is like not even a blink of an eye in the terms of how long this planet's been here. And then we're thinking, okay, we have an issue with either not enough people, if you ask, certain, like you might say in Japan, that their birth rate's going down and they're going to cease to exist one day. Or you can look at countries like India, China, Nigeria, where the population is just skyrocketing, and then they're going to take over the world, in population-wise in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So where do you fall in that population argument?
I'm not entirely sure. I in living in, say, like the Bay Area or one of the more popular metro areas, you can see where the impact of a lot of people in one area has an impact. We're meant to have a little bit of space. We're meant to be communal, but we're meant to have space. And when you start stacking people on top of each other, there can be issues. Now, Japan is an exemplary example of a country that has done well with stacking their populace together in large cities. But I would say the rest of the world is not as good, right? If we look at New York, LA, Chicago, Mexico City, over to London, we're having major economic issues because of that population growth in those metro areas. Now, being that I just moved to Idaho and have done a lot of traveling across the United States, there's actually a lot of land available for people to live. And I think that we see that down in the desert in the Middle East as well. It's just it may be undesirable to some people, but there's a lot of land available for us. And I do think that there's quite a bit of resources that we have for ourselves as the human race. There's, issues on, for instance, I'm talking about Africa here. Africa is 3 or 4 times the size of the United States. And from a agricultural standpoint, if they even started to build like us, they would be way more productive than, say, California on the agricultural side. So I think that from that standpoint, from a resource standpoint, we can survive as humans, but we're probably going to lose some big populations of animals. But I think that there may be some natural tendencies in our patterns, as you had mentioned. India or China, Europe, and the United States are flat or declining population growth because of the birth rates going down. I think that may have a positive impact, maybe, in 50 years or so, on instead of having another 4x from here, right, going 8 to 40 billion people. If it starts leveling out, then we might be all right long term.
Yeah, I hear that too. People say, well, the population rate's going down in the U.S. And you're right. Maybe in the last 30 years, it's going down. But overall, when you look at the history of the country, compared to where we were, it's like the interest rates with homes. People say the interest rates are shooting up now since the pandemic. Well, the pandemic, they were pretty much near zero.
Yeah.
You go back 30 years ago, they were like 15%.
Yeah.
So we're at whatever, 5-6% now. We're nothing compared to where we were in the 80s. So yeah, it's gone up over the last 2 or 3 years by a lot, but really in the grand scheme of things, we're still in a good spot.
Right.
And I think we can tie that back to when we talk about financial planning and thinking about long-term future. And it's a big question for people around here is, can I afford to have kids? Do I do what my parents and my grandparents did who were able to live the American dream, and they can live on one income, and then you could have 2 kids, white picket fence, and the family dog. And then is that even a reality? And now you've had the luxury of living both here in the Bay Area, and now you live in Idaho. Talk about some of the philosophy differences, and if maybe the American dream, as you call it, is something that's still a reality in certain parts of the world, of the country.
In the country, I would say it absolutely is a reality, and it's a reality that more and more Californians and some East Coasters as well, are realizing that they can do if they get on their horse and migrate back to the center, if you will. So whether that be in Texas or Idaho or Colorado, I guess the middle won't be Florida, but Florida is another state that's growing in population as well, because the cost of living is less. It's general circumstances safer. I have some personal anecdotes on that, but statistics you can point to.
You can make numbers look however you want to look.
Exactly. But anecdotally, I would say that it's safer in Idaho than it is here. And you're seeing that family dynamic. You can live that American dream out of state. I think it's very hard for the youth of today in California to live the American dream as it is. It is too expensive to live in California for a number of reasons. It just is.
And we had talked about it earlier. You gave me a long list of the things that you had to think about before you moved to Idaho. One of them being taxes and how California's tax rate compared to some of these other states is just off the whole charts for state taxes anyway. Then you get into sales tax and property taxes. But in general, where would that even change here? Because for Silicon Valley specifically, all the major tech hubs, Apple, Google, Meta, are all here, and I'm gonna say they rule the world, but they have a major influence in how the world is run now. It's a tech environment now. It's not industry like steel workers anymore. That's just been taken out.
What happens if half the tech workers lose their jobs due to either AI or the fact that they don't need, like Facebook doesn't need all of those workers anymore? What happens if those tech workers, maybe not in the tech field, I'll use Tesla as an example, pick up and move from California to Texas or Nevada? Mm-hmm. Like they have operations, right, in both of those states. What if they move everybody over there? Well, what happens to the hundreds of thousands of people that are employed in the Silicon Valley at that point in time? You'll see an economic shift like you'd never seen before in California, which is a scary thought for a lot of people, but that's a reality that could happen.
Do you think that will? Do you think Apple would pack up and move to Texas? Do you think Google would pack up and move? We're going to Idaho.
I'm not sure if they would move per se, but I can see them laying off half their workforce.
As time goes on and AI starts taking them, it's like, do we need these software engineers? This thing can pretty much do what they do?
Yep, exactly.
That's crazy.
I'll invest X amount of dollars into AI. It'll take care of 10 jobs. And I'll do that 100 times over, 1,000 times over.
The big one that I see is it's got the red flags on it is Meta. It's like when they took over for MySpace and pretty much killed MySpace. And now you're starting to see the cracks in Facebook. People don't use Facebook like they do. Their money was based on ad revenue, and people aren't going to Facebook anymore. Instagram is keeping them afloat, but Zuckerberg's putting his hands on the table when it comes to this metaverse. And some people were like, I don't want to wear goggles everywhere I go. So
I think that there's an inflection point that not just the United States is going to face, but the world, and that's where Meta, the metaverse, I think,
the
comes
4D
into
world,
play.
whatever.
However, it won't be happening for me. I love the outdoors too much, and I like to actually feel it, hiking it, hunting it. But there are a lot of people that can potentially live in that lifestyle, which is sad because what people don't, I look at it from, do you remember, I think it was Jimmy Neutron.
I remember that
one of the cartoons. Was it Jimmy? I think it was Jimmy Neutron, but it was an episode or a movie where basically they were living in the metaverse, and maybe it was Wall-E. Yeah, I'm going to get this. One of those cartoons.
I haven't seen either one, so you got to tell me.
But it was, living in the future, and they're living in a metaverse state, and everybody, thought of themselves as healthy and fit and running around, but they were just wearing, the Oculus or whatever, the system, and that was just tricking their brain. But then they themselves are deteriorating because they're not physically working out, interacting real, like one-on-one with somebody. So we're gonna face that as a society, probably in our lifetime, certainly our kids' lifetime or my kids' lifetime. I don't know the result of that long term. I don't think it'll be good.
Yeah, it'd be something, like if you're a conspiracy guy, imagine if aliens were really real, like the little green men. There's a conspiracy. Who knows if it's true or not? Like maybe that's us from 10,000 years in the future. Look how we evolved. We have big brains and we have no muscle tone because we don't need to lift things anymore. We can just use this and communicate. Right. Who knows how things are going to work? I
haven't heard that one, but that actually, logically can make some sense.
And then when we go back to how we plan long term, like our parents / grandparents who. Back in the day, it would used to be that the father would go out and work. You'd work for a company, let's say an auto manufacturer. You work there 30 years with your hands. You get a pension. You get a gold watch when you retire. The house is paid off. Life's good. You can't do that anymore. We don't have jobs where you can use your hands like that and stay for 30 years. It's now tech. And now we might be seeing these shift where tech is evolving to the point where we don't need the software engineers that you sort of were raised in when you went to college.
Yep.
Now we might be transitioning to something else. And that's a conversation that as a father for you had to say, how do I prepare my kids for what's coming down the line?
And I have no idea how to do that. That's a question that I ask myself on a regular basis is what does the future look like for the human race on this planet as we continue to automate and technology continues to advance? That train has left the station. We can't go back in time per se on those activities. That's happening. So as that's happening, usually there's always a new thing or new place that work will go to, right? We went from the fields to the manufacturing to tech. So what's next? I don't know what's next.
I don't know either.
I don't know what's next, but it could be, from Elon's standpoint, it could be colonizing the moon or Mars, right? And if you're doing there, yes, you'll have technology to do there, but there'll be work to be done on both of those.
Yeah, it's like we have the technology in theory to go to Mars and to go to the moon and to sustain life over there, and we would basically restart with the labor again. Okay,
restart with the labor.
We got to build everything back up again.
Maybe that's how it works. Maybe
Who knows?
that's what the plan is.
Oh, man, I can tell you, Elon is somebody who's not very well liked around this city. If you walk around, he did that or Chappelle had a concert in San Francisco a couple months ago, and he brought Elon on, and you could just hear all the boos in the crowd. And
it's funny that they all drive Teslas, though.
Isn't that?
They didn't like him until.
Trust me, I talked to a lot of people who hate the guy, and I just kind of want him to say, well, think about the bigger picture and think about how he runs his business. You can agree to disagree about how he handled the whole Twitter thing, but at the end of the day, he's got to where he got because of the decisions he's made, his ability to look into the future to see how this Tesla thing could have become a reality, how you were able to use government subsidies, because, correct me if I'm wrong, it costs more to make a Tesla than what they can sell it for, correct? Are we still at that point?
I believe so, or there might be a little bit of a profit margin now.
Gotcha. So basically, Tesla was able to survive because of the way the government subsidies work. That's how they're able to make these cars so people can afford them at a reasonable rate, if you want to call it reasonable.
Reasonable for California.
Exactly, yeah. They're not the $100,000 cars that they should be if you had to pay for everything. That's how Tesla actually works. So for him to be able to see that and work with the system, it tells you how smart of a businessman he is. You can agree to disagree with his politics on how he thinks, but he's a visionary that when he's able to put it into practice, and you got to respect him at least for that.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see what he turns this Twitter thing into, because I have no idea how you create that thing that's pretty much based off of ad revenue, but then in order to get the ad revenue, you got to play the game with the message that you're sending. And all those Twitter files that came out, you're kind of seeing how the game is played behind the scenes. What do you do with that? And it speaks a lot to how the rest of tech works here, is how do you, with all the money involved, how do you actually, if you're somebody who wants to work there, where do you fit in that cog? Are you comfortable with how the business is run? Are you comfortable with the fact that they're paying you a good salary to do software engineering or sales or whatnot? And then, a question that a lot of us are trying to figure out, especially around here, and, what the future of tech holds. So another thing we got into like the political side. That was an interesting sidetrack. See, these things go wherever they go. I bring somebody on, we start talking about things that I had no idea we were going to get into. But if we bring it back down to wealth management again, we talked a lot about retirement and what that looks like, and pretty much what a financial wealth manager actually does, and what the different services that they can actually offer. What do you think are some of the challenges that you see that the industry could get better in to make it well known? Is it pretty much just a communication issue for the young people to know what they even do? What do you see?
It's an education matter. Financial literacy boils down to math and education. So where do we start that? I think that it should start in our school systems, K through 12. I think that we need to incorporate that into our lexicon, because financial literacy is freedom. They are one and the same. I know the benefits of utilizing debt, but how we utilize debt in general is negative. When debt is used for business or real estate, potentially real estate, it can be a very big positive, right? We see that with our former president. He built an empire on debt. That could be a huge positive, for growth in utilizing somebody else's money to build a real estate portfolio or a business, right? To open up a new business. If you're able to create revenues from that, if you're able to leverage debt, that's a positive. But that's not how we utilize debt, the majority. The wealthy utilize debt that way. The majority of the others utilize negative aspect debt. Negative aspect debt is your auto loan, student loans, credit cards, and to some degree, home mortgages. Those are the negative aspects of debt that don't get talked about at all, K through 12 or in college. Instead of having a GE course, or what was that course that we had to take the first year of college? It was like general.
That's how long it's been. I have no clue.
There was a general studies class that everybody had to take. Instead of something like that, you have a financial literacy course that goes over what does taxation mean? What does debt mean? What is compound interest? And you're going through different problems, easy problems. I mean, compound interest is like simple algebra. It's practical algebra, right? We go through K through 12 mostly learning impractical math use.
Yeah.
Only the engineers, and really the engineers, are the only ones that utilize that math in the real world. The rest of us need to learn practical math. And practical math, to me, is ROI, IRR, compound interest. All of that could be taught in high school. There could be a class strictly dedicated to that.
Now give people the clip notes on those acronyms. I know ROI, return on investment. I've never heard of IRR. Give me that one.
Basically, internal rate of return.
Okay, which would mean
the growth on an asset minus all costs.
Okay, easy for people to understand. I say, oh, that's what that means. Okay, yeah. You mentioned
simple.
You mentioned mortgage debt and how that can be a good debt or it could be a bad debt. What does that mean to you to explain to people?
So bad debt would be if you buy a house too big for your means. For us, for my wife and I, when we were looking at it, we could have taken on bad debt to live in the Bay. Mm-hmm. That means buying a $2 million house, 20% down, getting, $1.6 million of debt for a house in Pleasanton or San Ramon or Hayward Hills, whatever the case may be. Or take less debt for a smaller house if we're staying in the Bay. And matching that to your income that you're making. A lot of people buy too much house.
We don't talk about that because people think bigger is better. I want that 4-bedroom in fill in the blank city that costs $3 million. But I really only need a 2-bedroom because it's me and my wife and we have one child.
Or you don't want kids.
Exactly.
Like your situation. Do you need a house if you don't want kids? Like, what are your needs? So let's talk about needs versus wants. All of these are great questions, and they boil down to very simple answers, right? Is it a need or a want? You could literally have a first grader do this. And if you had needs and wants and you were teaching that all through school, we'd now have a populace that was more educated on financial literacy, which then makes them make better decisions when they start working. Some as early as 12 is like the legal age to start working. I know I worked before that, but odds and ends jobs, but whatever it is that they start earning an income, if they have some semblance of financial literacy backing it, they can start making wiser decisions earlier on in life. We mentioned earlier in the conversation that 35 or 40-year-old that realized that they should have started saving at 20. Could you imagine if the 20-year-old started saving at 12? Now, I'm not talking about saving a lot, but if the 12-year-old goes out and gets a job in the summertime and makes a couple $100, and they put that all into a Roth, which they can absolutely do because they don't need it because they've got family that supports them, right? So literally take half of it. Their taxes aren't going to be that high. It's not that much income. They take half of it and go spend it on fun, movies and new shoes and all that. And they take half of it and put it into a Roth. They do that for 8 years, 10 years, 12 to 22. They're going to have $20,000, $30,000 by the time they're 22. But more importantly, they're going to have the habit.
That's what I was going to get
saving already built or save. You hear me mix up saving and investing. I want to make this clear. Saving is not investing and investing is not saving. Those are two totally different things. Investing can lose your asset. I don't care what you're investing in. So when people say that I have a 401k and that's savings, that's incorrect. That is an investment. 401ks go up and down unless you haven't invested in a money market fund. Therefore, it's not growing or not growing,
Or growing like
as
a measly
very
rate.
little
Yeah.
bit. But I guess in that case, it would be savings. But if you're investing in a mutual fund or ETF or individual stocks and bonds or real estate, all of those assets go up and down over time. That is an investment. A savings vehicle does not go down, period. It may grow slow, but it doesn't go down.
Yeah.
So those are two different things. They get interchanged a lot in my industry, but there is a definite separation of those two. But if you habitually learn to save and invest from 12 to 22, what happens when you graduate from college at 22 and start in your career? You're going to habitually save and invest from the get-go. And that is all the difference in the world. Time value of money.
Yeah.
Compound interest. That's it. Financial literacy is easy. It's hard to implement.
Yeah.
Very hard to implement, but easy to explain and
That one habit, you're right. Had I done that at 12, 13 years old when you're making your first job, and the dollar doesn't matter at that point, but you get in the habit of saying, I make $1, I'm going to take 50 cents, and this is my fun money, because what are you going to spend it on at that age? For the ice cream man or something like that.
Exactly.
And Dad, here's 50 cents. And your father, whoever gets you in that habit, here, give me your $1. Here's 50 cents. I'm going to put this away for you. It's going to go in your piggy bank, whatever you want to explain to your kids.
Yep.
And then that person helps you invest the money. And the next thing you know, you're so used to taking whatever percentage of your money, and this is mine, that goes there. Now you're in the habit. Now when you get to those jobs when you're a teenager working at McDonald's or whatever, then you're already used to, okay, here's my money, half of it or whatever goes here, and this is mine. Then you get older, and then you get into bigger paying jobs, and you're already in that habit. But trying to do that at an older age when you've only known spend, then it becomes a problem. How do I now train myself to say, this is my $1, but really I only have 40 cents of it, and the other 60 has to go to taxes, pension, 401k, savings account, whatever it is, because I have to think long term. It's so hard to do it, especially when you're in your 20s and it's all about like the flash, how you look.
Right.
I got the Gucci this, or I got the Ferragamo shoes, whatever. We've all been in that trap at some point.
yep.
Yeah, but and then another thing that you brought up too that nobody talks about is how much house you buy. We get so caught up in that. I got to have the big house because whether I want to agree with it or not, I got to kind of show off that I'm doing good. It's a sign that I'm doing really well if I get that 2-story house on the island somewhere like in Alameda. But then you were like, there's a lot of empty space in here. I can either fill it with more stuff, and that's going to cost money. But I don't see it that way. I see the valuation of the house going up, so I'm making money, right? And then when you break it down to people, it's like, well, actually, if you really break it down, like this is how much you're paying per square foot versus if you would have bought like a 2-bedroom somewhere else at half the price. Yeah, you're not going to make as much on paper in the equity because it's a half the value house, but percentage wise, what you're spending, that's got to be a hard conversation to have with people in your industry.
It is. So all of these are, because it's not taught at an early age. We're not taught those things at an early age. If we were, well, my job might be obsolete at that point.
Yeah.
But
Job security, man.
But that's why I'm a wealth manager. So honestly, those conversations I don't particularly have. I've now tailored my practice to deal with high net worth individuals that they don't need me to tell them that they need to save X, Y, Z. They need me to say, I have this available to save. Where should I put it so that it maximizes whatever my tax deductions or the amount that I can grow, right? There's a difference in how we grow money, which is why a 401k or a Roth IRA are fantastic vehicles because there's embedded tax benefits inside of them. The government usually gives us a couple of them, rarely all three, but it's tax deductibility, tax deferred growth, and tax-free withdrawals. The 401k is the tax deductibility and tax deferred growth. There's some Roth 401k options as well, which will utilize the latter. But those are some of the largest tax benefits that as an individual you can take advantage of. And again, that's not taught in any school. And there's a very simple explanation or
They're trying to keep us poor. Is that what it is?
They might be, but there's a simple math problem that you can share. I'm probably going to get it wrong because I'm doing it off the top of my head. But if you took $1 and you doubled it every year for 20 years. Impossible rate of return. Don't even try it.
Yeah.
Don't call me and say, you said you could get
John
100%
said, I don't know what happened.
every year for 20. No. But hypothetically, if you did that, you would have over $1 million. If you apply a tax rate, I forget the tax rate. That's the part of the problem that I forget. I think it's 30%. But if you apply a tax rate of 30% on the gain, so instead of 1 becoming 2, 1 becomes
0.7,
1.7, right? Because you got to pay taxes on the gain. So that over the same period of time, 20 years, what are you left with? $50,000.
That's crazy.
$1 million was lost with 100% rate of return over 20 years each year because of taxation. That's the power of tax deferred growth. So that's where a 401k plan or an IRA have tremendous tax advantages because that dollar is allowed to grow to the $1 million and then they tax it.
Gotcha.
Right? And even if they tax it same percentage, 30%, once it's reached $1 million, you still have $700,000, not 50. That's the power of utilizing the right vehicle to grow your investment. That's where I think my job is safe for now until the AI figures that aspect out. And there's a bunch of different codes and whatever that you can invest in.
I mean, if savings were easy, everybody would have done it. And you can make an argument that if you want to get into conspiracy theories, that the powers that be don't want you to know that because if you start saving and not spending, well, then their business goes down. That's a whole conspiracy theory. We're not going to get into that because people have their own opinions on that.
Yes.
But, it's amazing when you think about how much these things can actually grow. So for the average person, what's the average salary in this country? Like $50,000, $60,000?
$50,000 to $60,000.
So for them, it's if in theory you could max out your 401k at like $20,000. That's a lot.
That won't happen at their percentage. Although I do have a client, they are by far the best investing client that I've ever met. Not from the sense of the dollars per se. Everybody can, not everybody. A lot of people can make money and save money and invest money, but they truly are the average American living in California making $50,000 to $60,000 a year each. Now they both work, so they were both working, so that's call it $120,000. But they were able to save because they systematically do it every single year for the last 25 years. They were able to amass over $1.5 million of assets. By far the cleanest example of just two people living within their means, saving and investing properly over a long period of time. They take 1 or 2 small vacations a year. They drive a old pickup truck, an old minivan, and that's they have 2 kids, living basically the American dream, but just regular jobs over a period of time. If I could carbon copy them, that would be a fantastic story. But
that's exactly why I tell people I still drive my '07 Civic. It runs great, it's paid off, and it gets me from point A to point B. And for people like that, exactly that money that you would have otherwise spent $4,000 or $5,000 a month on a car could have gone somewhere else. And at the end of the day, that car still needs maintenance. It's still going to break down. And what do you do with it? It's crazy how as you get older, you start putting the pieces together. Like, yeah, this is how money works. I'm not getting any younger, so I need to really start figuring out where my dollar is being spent.
Where's it going?
So like when you talk about tax deferred issues, I know it's different for every state. In California, we get taxed a lot, and places like Idaho, Texas, Florida, maybe their state taxes are near zero or pretty close to a zero. So for people in higher tax states like California, if you maximize your 401k, 457b, whatever it is, then, what are some of the benefit, or if you can get into as specific as you can get into, where else can people go to put money in to help save it? Do they just get multiple IRAs? How does that work?
So no, there's specific rules on IRAs or 401k plans that limit the amount of contributions that could go into them. If they're business owners or maybe key employees at small businesses, there may be some things that we can talk with the owners of the company on creating defined benefit plans, or like a pension plan or a profit sharing plan, so that they share in a bonus structure that's different than just here's a bonus. that can have some tax advantages to it. On a personal level, depending on their income, if they've already maximized their Roths and 401ks, there is what's called permanent life insurance. I would be remiss to say that you have to do permanent life insurance correctly, meaning you have to fund it correctly for a long period of time for it to work. There are embedded costs in the first few years that make it not right for a lot of people. But that is a Roth alternative or a Roth add-on that you can do inside of the permanent life insurance world. Real estate is a great investment for some of the tax advantages that come with it, from depreciation to sheltering on some of the income. And Californians typically know that from a appreciation standpoint.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
so we have our booms and busts in real estate in California. When in the rest of the country, or again, more of those middle states, real estate is more of an income play than an appreciation play. But there are certainly some advantages for those in California. Looking at that now, you're looking at it like any other cycle. And I would say that although we are coming down, we're not near where I think the bottom is going to come in for real estate, with rising interest rates and what have you. But there's opportunities if you look at a market to, again, one of the principles of finance that will be in my children's book is you buy low and sell high. We've heard that adage forever.
Yes. Do you have a personal opinion on this idea that real estate, especially around here, has become more of a commodity than it has been an actual American dream? Because the old idea was you buy a house, you live in it 30 years, pass it on to your kids, and then they have a house. Yeah. And here, because of the way that money flows in the Bay Area, it turns into, I can buy this house now. Oh, I appreciate it by $300,000. Let me take the equity out and I'll put it into a new house and start repeating the pattern, which part of the reason why the housing prices drives up. Which you can make an argument, the average blue-collar worker here, it prices them out because now they can't compete with that. Do you have any thoughts on the whole idea about that?
So I think that real estate on the coasts are going to see some issues going forward into the future. I think that I might be even a product of that individually. My wife and I, we both make very good money and could have lived in California. But because of, again, financial literacy reasons, it didn't make sense to, so we moved out. And I think a lot of people are realizing that. A lot of people my age are realizing that with families. Again, everybody's individual situation is totally different. I definitely understand that and appreciate that. But I think it was a net 1% of California population left last year alone. Over 300,000 people net left. It's a state of 30 million people, so that's 1% left. I don't think that that's a trend that's going to stop. It may slow down because we are priced out of the areas that we grew up in. Again, I'm not paying over $2 million for the homes that I grew up in. Literally, my parents' home, right? I'm not going to pay $1.5 to $2.5 million for those types of homes that have deferred maintenance issues. They're not new. They've been around, those homes are built in the 70s and 80s. They've got some issues that cost money.
Yep.
So if I'm buying new, we're now talking $2 to $3 million in, again, the communities that I would like to live in the Bay Area, which would be more the East Bay, Danville, San Ramon, Pleasanton, Livermore, potentially Hayward Hills. All of those new communities, though, are expensive. So if in looking at that, you're saying, if I can move somewhere else and raise my family there and live a more of that typical American dream, I'm going to do it. And that's why we see a lot of people. I'm sure you can look at your friend group or people around, your coworkers. There's a lot that have moved out for that exact reason. And that's not going to change. Now, what's going to buoy the California market, and probably New York as well, is foreign investors coming in and buying those properties, which we've seen in California, right? There's still a huge influx of Chinese money coming over here and investing in real estate stateside. And that's not probably going to change. going into the future.
There's been a lot of new condominium builds around here. Then because of the view that I have, you can see that when the lights come on, they're not almost all, but there's a good portion that are empty, and they've been empty for a long time. And you realize that, yeah, it's money that's being dumped there. Then they don't want to rent it out. It's just to hold their money.
Yeah.
And then you get into the whole idea of where does this money come from overseas? Because the money's safer over here in America than it is in some of the banks in other countries.
We have a free market. So
Yes.
the free market is you can look at it as there's a benefit there's a cost to it. So they may not want to generate the rental income, but they don't need it. To your point, if they had the money in a bank over in China, for instance, they can have it seized. Mm-hmm. They can't have it seized over here. So they put the money over here, even if it's losing 1 or 2%, who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
Who cares?
Exactly.
It's a glorified bond over here, even if it's flat or even a little bit negative.
Exactly. Yeah, and so you start seeing, or you were before the pandemic. I think it's probably eased up a little bit because people have left. But you start seeing where these empty buildings over here. It's a reflection of what may have happened in China, where people want to put their money in real estate, and there's buildings that are almost empty, if not completely empty, but there's money tied up into it. So you build a building just to keep it empty because people want to just keep the money invested. And then what does that do here when you have, homes and condos that are bought as investments and they're left empty because, well, I don't want to rent it out. My money's safe here. And then what does that do and that's the philosophical question, I think, that what does it do for the average Joe who's like, there's a house right there. I would love to rent it out at the very least, but they don't want to do it. Or I want to buy that house. It's been sitting there, but no one wants to sell it and no one's living in it. Like, what am I going to do? Or because it's growing, its equity, it keeps going up, and I'm like, I'm down here, whatever. It's like, how do you really tell like the average person around here, like, hey, this may not be for you to live in California anymore if you want to have the typical American dream, or it's gonna be very difficult at the very least.
A lot of people's biggest asset is their home, especially in California, because of that appreciation over time. When people go into their family home or buy their family home, they're typically going to stay there for 15, 20 years. In California, that's usually 1 or 2 asset appreciation time periods for real estate. And that creates this problem where their number one asset is their home. But the only way to tap into that value is negative debt, a home equity line of credit or something along those lines, or to refinance, which in some circumstances, or maybe a reverse mortgage if your age fits and there's some parameters there. But is to either do one of those 3 things or sell and take a pretty substantial tax benefit. If you're married, it's $500,000 tax-free gain on the property. Go somewhere else, whether that be inside of the counties of LA or the Bay Area, or outside of that. So to me, California is a little bit different. California is like 6 states in one, but
yeah, pretty much.
But even if I cut it into 2, it's LA, Orange County in the Bay, and San Diego as one part of California. And then the other part of California is inward. For me, that starts in Tracy, goes all the way down to the border. Sort of like a straight line both directions. So Redding, Sacramento, all that's like a different part of California.
Yeah.
Cheaper cost of living. So if you want to move out there, I've had family members move either up north or to the center and do exactly that. Or move out of state, as many friends and family have done as well, because it's just cheaper. And if you're going to take your number one asset, right, if you've only got, I don't know, $300,000 in your 401k plan, $500,000 in your 401k plan, and you've got $1 million of equity in your house, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to retire. Well, if you were able to get that $1 million out and go buy a $500,000 house in Idaho or Florida, now we've got $750,000 to $1 million to play with for your retirement. Now we're talking.
Gotcha.
Now we can generate 30 to 70 grand a year of income off of that nest egg, coupled with you just paid off a home in another state.
Yeah.
Now you can retire and be financially independent. But what's that do for your kids? They can no longer buy that house.
Yeah.
You're not going to give that to them anymore. You're utilizing it as an asset for you, not for them, which is That's fine. We have to have that conversation as
Yeah.
a financial planner.
Yes.
Because oftentimes it's like being in an airplane.
Yeah.
When you're in an airplane, what does the flight attendant say when you've got kids?
Brace. Wait, what?
When you have kids, you don't have kids. So,
Yes, I don't.
But you've been on airlines, so I'm sure.
I probably heard the spiel from them at some point.
So they're going to, when the mask comes down,
Ah, yes.
they say, put your mask on first before you put it on your children.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell you that every single time because we're parents. We want to look out for our kids first, which is logical.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to save yourself first. You have to save yourself first before you can help others. So in financial world, you have to save yourself first before you help your children. And that comes across in many different ways. That's one way with the home. Another way is with college planning. A lot of parents ask me, what's more important, for me to save for my own retirement or for college for my children? The vanilla answer or the general answer is yourself. Save for your retirement.
Mm-hmm.
With college, there's 4 or 5 different ways to pay for college. I don't agree with all of them. I don't agree with getting in student loan, but you can. You can work your way through. You can work your way to get there. What I mean by that is scholarship, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
that be educational scholarship or music, talent, or an athlete. You can work. That's work. So if you work your way to those end goals, you're paying for college. Or you can work through college. You know, I had 4 or 5 jobs in college, sometimes 3 or 4 at the same time, to work through and graduate debt free.
Mm-hmm.
That was my goal. Those are all possibilities for college for a child. There's literally one way that you get to retire. That's it. There's one. You either save enough and invest enough or you don't. If you don't save enough and invest enough, you cannot borrow your way to retirement. There is no bank on this world that is going to say, you know what? You're 65 years old with no job. I'm going to give you $1 million. No way. There's no way a bank is going to do that.
Yeah.
So they're going to say, you know, what value do you bring? How are you going to be able to pay me back? Right? That's what the bank is going to say. So you can't borrow yourself to retirement. You can invest and save, and that's it.
Pretty much.
So put the mask on yourself first. Save for yourself first.
That's got to be hard for parents, especially parents who are maybe younger than us. And see, when we graduated college, you know, even then it wasn't nearly as much to go there as it would probably be now.
Yeah.
If we went to the same school, and how much did the cost just skyrocketed?
Even while we were there, it pretty much skyrocketed. I remember, I think our first year, it was less than 10 grand.
Yeah, it was something what we consider manageable now. That's all we knew back then, so we thought it was a lot. But compared to today,
Now it's probably, I haven't looked in a long time, to be honest, but I know when I graduated the master's program, it was around $15,000 a year. That's a pretty big difference in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Now I would assume that it's, you know, 20 to 25,000 to go to a state school.
You're right. And it's like, what do you, as a parent, you know, how do you process that? Because you assume that when your kid's going, it's going to get more expensive. And it's, do I want to pay for them to go to college and have an opportunity? Because you can make an argument that part of the reason, this is the controversial side, but like part of the reason why student debt gets up is because we've sold America on you have to have a degree to get anywhere. But when you saturate the market with everybody who has degrees, now how do you stand up? When we graduate, it's easier to stand out with a degree than it is now. Now you're just one of everybody has a degree.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Yep.
And then you start saying, well, geez, was that 100 grand or whatever that I spent for college worth it?
Yep.
I owe Uncle Sam or Sally Mae all that money, and now I can't even find a job. It's like, how do you have that conversation with the parents, or even how do you process that?
It's a tough one to process. So luckily, you know, for myself personally, we've got the systems and habit in place. So my wife and I are taking care of our own retirement, and we're able to and have the ability to save for our children's education or invest in there. So we're utilizing 529 college plans, which have some good tax advantages for them, but it's not going to be all encompassing for them. Both of us worked our way through college, and we expect that of our children as well. But we're also trying to empower them at a young age. They're 6, 4, and 2. So empowering them at a young age
we'll get there eventually.
It's not the same as a 12-year-old, but they do work. They do work around the house, even as the 2-year-old has chores that he gets paid for.
That's awesome.
So
He's talking about 2 years old.
It's not, we're probably breaking some labor laws or something like that. But it's about instilling those values at an early age with them. And we're not forcing them to save right now. They're 6, 4, and 2, so they get to spend their money on what they want to spend their money on. But they are learning to save for what they want. So, they've gone to the dollar store a few times, and the toy that they buy will break within 24 hours.
Welcome to life.
And they're like, I just bought this, and it broke. And it's like, well, that's quality. You're learning quality. So when you buy from some stores, it's a lower quality product and it's not going to last as long. So if you want a longer lasting product, you may have to spend more. So, Target, for instance, will go spend $5 or $10 of your money on a Lego set or something like that. And that's going to last a long time. In fact, here's my box of Legos that I had from 20 or 30 years ago. They last a long time. They don't break. And they're like, oh, but it cost me $5 instead of $1. And now they know the difference. Yeah. So we're learning quality and that aspect of it. Eventually we'll get to taxes and savings.
Yes.
But they're building that work ethic as well as that saving aspect of finance at a young age, because I do believe financial literacy starts at home, should be taught in schools, and hopefully by the time they're 18 or 22 at the latest, they have a good head on their shoulders to be able to implement whatever strategies that are available at that future date, to be able to not have to hire me.
Yeah, that's some great fatherly advice. That's so awesome to hear that. That's not a story that I hear of from parents. We don't ask, how do you parent? But that's a really great one that at that 2 years old, no one thinks to do that to a 2-year-old kid. So that's excellent that you do that. We're going to have to see how fast time goes, man.
Oh, wow.
Everybody says that when they're in your chair, like, oh, that's been that long already. Yes. So I'm going to have to wrap it up, and I want to talk about your book really fast. Before I do it, if you're listening or watching and you enjoy, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with all your friends and family so we can help to get the message out there. So tell me about this book that you're writing, Mr. Author.
So again, it's got no title. It does have basically the financial principles that we've sort of discussed on this talk today in it. So it goes through, call it very simple illustrations as far as basic investment advice or savings advice, as far as buying low, selling high, internal rate of return, return on investment. It goes through conversations, or the idea is it's going to go through conversations about that, utilizing a cartoon character. The cartoon character is in the picture of a monster, because finances can be scary, but through the end of it, the idea is that we can overcome those fears and become financially literate with some basic principles or basic steps. So that's the direction that the book is going.
That's a really cool idea. Now, did the motivation for this come from your upbringing, how you want to raise your kids, or maybe something that you've been hearing from your clients where I see an area in the market that people don't talk about enough?
I would say that it's a combination of really all of those three things. I was raised with that mindset. So my dad and mom did, I think, a great job in raising me as far as financial literacy is concerned. I was taught at a young age the value of $1. I worked for it. I worked for my dad. Through that, it created an opportunity that I saw to help other people. I worked there. They would empower me by saying, you're going to get X amount of dollars for a pair of shoes. You can take your extra money and go buy Jordans if you want, but realize that that's on you, not us. I walked into a store and saw how much Jordans were and saw how much they were giving me, and I said, that's going to deplete me. So I'll just buy a little bit more than what they were going to do. Like, I think I got Allen Iverson's shoe for like $30 or something like that, or $40.
Iverson's.
versus the Jordans that were still in the hundreds even back then. So it's like little principles like that I learned from them. Obviously, in my line of work, I go through these conversations, which is sad. I go through these conversations with my clients even today, as far as some of those principles on how the economy works and everything. So it is a combination of all of that, but I want to try to not dumb it down, but bring it down to, really here are these principles. They're time-honored principles that have lasted for millennia. Not to get necessarily biblical, but some of them are principles that you can find in the Bible as far as indebtedness or loans. When you have a loan or you take a loan out from somebody, you're serving two masters. If you're a believer in God, you shouldn't serve two masters. So debt is that other master. You're a slave. And that's how I think today's environment, right? We don't have in the United States, I appreciate around the world there are still slaves. And that is an extremely sad and unfortunate situation in indentured servitude or slavery. But we have slaves here in America too. They're the ones that have the hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. They are slaves. They are absolutely slaves. Not in the traditional sense, again, of lashings and hard labor, but they are working for somebody else's enjoyment. That's a slave. If we can teach those principles in school, which this might be getting to the conspiracy side of things, that you might have the banking heads get mad at me and not allow the book to go out because I'm teaching these principles. But that is a fact, that these principles will allow whoever reads them and implements them to live a financially free life. That does not mean a financially extravagant life. That means financially free, meaning that if they live within their means, whatever their means may be, if that's somebody making $50,000 a year or $1 million a year, it doesn't matter. If they shape their life around whatever their financial means are, they're going to live a happier life. And that's going to show in the decisions that they make with their spouse, with their kids, and provide that work-life balance that I and Jenny have found for ourselves. It's still a constant, ever changing over time, but that's one of the things that drew us to moving to Idaho, is so that we can have that work-life balance, so that we can go out and we can hike, we can do trails, we can spend more time with the kids and be involved in their lives, and not necessarily have to worry about the dollar as much. Well,
with that, and this is and this goes back to the story I told you about Vegas and the person with the stimulus check. There is a mindset out there, whether we agree with it or not, that some people could say, well, I don't care how much I'm spending, because when I go on from this world, I don't have to worry about it. And if I don't have any kids, then that's money that I don't have to pay back. And it can be a challenging mindset, because I guess you can make the argument, you could see their point. If you look at life that way, that, well, I can spend as much money as I want now. If they're going to give it to me, I'll spend it, and I'm just not going to pay it back. And obviously that's a very unhealthy and dangerous mindset. But is there any logic to that?
No, because even as an individual, like if you're not leaving a legacy behind, there is no guarantee that you or anybody is going to live a healthy life. They could be alive, but not healthy, right? And if they get up to their latter stages of life in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and they've worked and they haven't saved and invested and they've risked it all on black in Vegas.
At the roulette table,
the roulette table. What happens when they're 65, have cancer, and can't work anymore? Whose responsibility are they now? And that's where politically, I would say that was on them. They made a choice in life to not save, to not invest, to not put money for themselves. I, as a taxpayer, should not be responsible for their incompetence.
Yeah, that's where we get into a bigger controversy here. This is how people vote, and it's for reasons like that. How do you view life? If you're the responsible type and you saved up and you've invested, you have a very good case to make to say, as a taxpayer, why should I pay for somebody else who made a choice? You can make an argument if they didn't make the choice and life just sort of fell in their lap, like earthquake or something like that. But then if you made the choice, is it up to me to pay you as a taxpayer? And that's going to be a cliffhanger I want to leave this one on, John. This
All
has been
right.
an awesome episode, man. Thank you so much for coming out. And I got to get you back on your flight to Idaho. For you coming out for me, that was so awesome, man. But if people want to reach out to you or have questions for you specifically, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
So let's see. My email address is jlane@peak360wealth.com. The firm is Peak 360 Wealth Management out of San Ramon. Our broker dealer is Lion Street Financial. If you know my cell phone number, it hasn't changed in 20 years, so you can get a hold of me that way. I don't want to necessarily give that over.
Yeah, we won't put the cell phone out there.
the web, but
we won't put
we'll
that
go
out
from
there.
there.
But at least if somebody has questions like, oh, this is a thing, and I want to reach out to somebody. And part of that, of having this conversation too, is not only do people learn about this industry and what it's for, but then they get to know you as an investor. Yeah. It's almost like when you want to go buy a house and you don't know the real estate agent, you're kind of like, I don't know, is he just trying to sell me the house, or does he really care about my interests? But hearing somebody's background and their side of the story and why they think the way that they think helps to put a human perspective on the face instead of just saying the guy on the business card. So it's been, I'm glad to get it out there, man. Great conversation, John. Thank you so much. For everybody that's watching or listening, if you like the show, please like the episode. Subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave a comment. So the reason why it's important is because the more comments that we see, the more the listeners see it, the more they're going to want to watch the episode. And if you really like the show and you want to help continue to support it, I do have a Patreon account. You can just go to the Patreon link in my description and you can leave a donation there. That really helps out the channel. It helps me buy more equipment, helps me get on great guests like John to get you the information that you need to have a great life, and to remind everybody that you do have control over aspects of your life that you think you might not. Finances is a good example here. You may think that you're up the river without a paddle, but really, we make some changes in your life, you can live a financially secure future. Thank you, John, for coming out. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and have a good day. Take care.